I'm perfect in the sense that I don't act hypocritically, and to the degree that I actually work hard at work, I'm not contradicting myself. I'm not. So, in that sense, I'm perfect. And I invite people to find contradictions or points of hypocrisy where they think I'm acting hypocritically. Uh, but I maintain that I'm not acting hypocritically and not contradicting myself. So in that sense, I'm perfect. But yeah, that's about it. Okay.
Okay, well, if you wanted to continue this or another time or um
Yeah, I got up to over 100, over like 150
yeah.
points that I summarized off of you.
I mean,
It's crazy.
I'm willing to keep going tonight, but it sounds like you're running out of steam or
Um, Hold on a second. How much time do you have?
I've got all night. But maybe we could touch on just maybe a couple of points that really stood out to you or just keep chugging along, whatever you want.
All right, let's see. Let's see how much further we can. All right. All right. You implied there are two sides to Islam: the peaceful side and the political. Um, or it seems to me that you implied that.
Mhm. I think that's probably
There's
true of
dual
most
sides of it.
religions.
You claimed there's the dual sides of it. There's the peaceful side and the political oppressive side, and it's both. You can't really take out one or the other.
Mhm. Same with Christianity, I think.
That's ridiculous. That seems to contradict what you said earlier. So you did
What?
in fact imply. Hold on. So you did in fact imply number 23 that I put here. A person can't believe in one side of Islam without believing in the other side. So that seems like an accurate representation or an accurate summary of your position.
Well, someone can cherry pick. That's certainly possible. But the ideology itself, what is in the document, that is, you can't, it's wrong to cherry pick, I think.
Wait a minute.
It's inconsistent. If you believe in the religion, then essentially you're cherry picking if you're not believing everything that's in the scriptures.
I don't know how to explain the problem with what you just said in such a way that you would under. Why can't you see that? Okay, did you misspeak when you said it's wrong to cherry pick?
Um, Perhaps
What do you mean by wrong? In what way is it wrong?
I would say it's inconsistent. Um, it's hypocritical.
Is it
I
by
tend to
definition?
prefer the cherry pickers of religion because they cherry pick out the good parts and kind of throw away the bad parts. And fundamentalists tend to be much worse people overall, but they are more consistent to their scriptures and ideology. So it's kind of a paradox.
No. See, that's the clue that you're contradicting yourself, that you hold some contradictions in your view. That's the clue that you should be able to see. The way I see it, um, you need to go down the list and ask a person what their moral views are.
Yeah.
And it'll come out as a list, like I have made of your views. You'll end up having a list of views. All right. And unless one of their views is you must behave, you must follow all the violent, or you must follow all the, you must interpret all of the the violent scriptures as violent and enact that violence, unless one of their views is something like that, then it is possible for them to not be contradicting themselves. Do
Well,
you see?
if the words of Muhammad say that you can do something, then those are the words of Muhammad. Someone might
Tautology.
someone might well, yeah, that's exactly. That's
You haven't made
that's
your
the
point yet.
religion. So someone might just follow what they want out of that,
Yes,
but the
but
actual
you have to show.
religion.
You have to show the hypocrisy in there. Where's the explicit hypocrisy? Where's the explicit contradiction?
Because if you're a follower of Muhammad and you only follow certain parts of what he says, then you're ignoring parts of what Muhammad says to do.
Yes,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that they're contradicting themselves.
It means that they are not being consistent in their devotion to the Prophet. Or they're cherry picking.
If they're cherry picking, then that means. See, how else can I explain it to you?
It's
The
like,
very fact that they're cherry picking the good parts, it's possible to just take the good parts, the way you see it, the way you define whatever part of the Quran is good. It's possible to take those good parts and follow those and lead your life according to those. And so that person who's doing that is not necessarily contradicting themselves. They may be contradicting your interpretation of the scripture, or they may be ignoring the parts that you think that they are supposed to be following according to the definition of Islam. But it doesn't mean that they are contradicting themselves.
the problem is, if the scripture says it's true, then according to that religion, it is true. And there are different sects of the religion that interpret things or ignore certain things, but the scripture is the religion. It's the foundation of the religion.
Okay, that's better. All right, so again, are you able to actually make the argument that a person is okay? For example, let's go with leftism. Let's call it leftism, okay? Now, I call myself a leftist, all right? Now, would you consider going over to I don't know, where are those places that they say leftists congregate in? Tumblr, what is it?
The site, Tumblr, yeah.
Yeah, Tumblr, something like that. You go over there and you get a list of things that someone somewhere called liberalism. And you say, hey, Kris, you call yourself a liberal, or I mean, a leftist. You have a list of what counts as leftism from Tumblr. And you say, Kris, you call yourself a leftist, but you're not following all of the things that I found on this list. Therefore, you're contradicting yourself. You see, in my view, that doesn't follow.
Well, it doesn't quite work as well with politics, but in the political realm, you could say someone who calls himself a constitutionalist, but they ignore part of the Constitution, they are contradicting themselves, because with most political positions, you don't actually have a founding document that is the central tenets of some position. But with religions, at least the Abrahamic religions, they have a document that is the foundation of that religion, that has supposedly divine rules written in it. So if you're saying that you are a devotee to those rules, everyone knows, like, you don't necessarily agree with something that a Tumblrina wrote about liberalism or leftism, but everyone who is a Muslim or a Christian believes in the Quran or the Bible, respectively.
Okay, so there's a fundamental part that you're missing here. Let's go with the constitutionalism. So if I were to call myself a constitutionalist, and you say, hey, Kris, there's a part of the Constitution that you're ignoring, that doesn't mean that I am that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm contradicting myself, because you haven't asked me what my definition of constitutionalism is. You see? That's the missing link in the chain of your thought process.
Sure,
You
and
first
then I
have
would
to ask,
say you're
you
just
first
using a
have to
different
ask the person.
definition.
So you first have to ask the person what their views are and see if there are contradictions in those views as they express their views.
Hmm.
You got
The
to try to accurately. What I do is I try to accurately summarize people, and
mhm.
then I try to show by comparing all the different positions that there's a contradiction or a tension between these positions. All
Mhm.
right. I try not to ascribe to them positions that they have not expressed themselves. You know.
Yeah, the problem with religions is they're saying that they're devotees of a divine document, and especially with Islam, they they
Let's
literally
keep it to
claim.
constitutionalism. Just because I think you're. Let's just keep it to constitutionalism.
Well,
Use
the
that
main
analogy
point
to make your
was
point.
was about religions, and Islam says that
I don't
the
think
Quran is the
the thought.
perfect literal word of God. So I think that the problem is worse for them. But all right, let's go with
The,
constitutionalists.
yeah, what I'm saying is that the flaw in your thought process is the same in both cases, but you keep going to Islam and Christianity. You keep going to religion
Well,
to try to make your point.
wasn't that the context that we're talking about?
When I think it'll be clearer to you if we just stick to the constitutional, because fundamentally you're not asking Muslims what their definition of Islam is. You're just skipping over that part. You're saying they believe the Quran is they say that they are devotees of Islam, and they believe everything that Muhammad says is the word of God, or whatever that is. Okay, but you haven't asked them. You need to ask individual people what their definition of Islam is. That's the part that I think that you're missing. You keep skipping over that until you ask them.
And maybe you can put a qualifier like I am this type of Muslim. I believe in this type of Islam. But if we're talking about what is real, true Islam, it is what the Quran says. If you tell me you're a constitutionalist and you ignore part of the Constitution, I would tell you then don't call yourself a constitutionalist because that's not what you are.
All right, fine. See, with this example, I still think that this is the better example to use. So in this case, you're literally saying that I should not call myself what I self-identify as, because according to your definition, I don't fit. And you're saying that I cannot use my definition of the word. I have to use your definition of the word. You see what you've done there?
Well, there are definitions to words, so like I might be happy to use your usage of the word.
All right, and that's what I do when I'm debating with individual people.
Hmm.
All right.
But
So
but when we're talking about
again,
ideas, I
we've been talking about ideas the whole time.
yeah, but we
Okay.
have to have labels for ideas, and I think that it's fair to say that the ideas of the Quran are Islam.
No. Yeah, yeah. When you again, it depends. Like it sounds like you're trying to come up with a general Islam. You're trying to define Islam in general, and you've defined it in a very particular way. And so, if a person comes up to you and self-identifies as a Muslim, you would almost, according to the analogy, you would be saying, "Don't call yourself a Muslim, because you're not following all the words of Muhammad the way I think you should, the way I think that word implies." And so you're saying you shouldn't call yourself a Muslim. You should call yourself something else, peaceful Muslim or something. I don't know. And so you're not giving people the flexibility to define the words the way they resonate, the way they want to define it. And then you're claiming if they if they call themselves, if they self-identify as Muslim, but they don't think, but they don't hold the position you think all Muslims are supposed to hold, then they are contradicting themselves. And I'm saying, no.
Well, it's basically it's just a problem when you're saying that it's a divine document. Like if we're taking the claims
so
of
what
the
if
document to at face value, it says this is the word of God. This is the tenets of this.
So why
God.
don't you ask them?
So
why don't you just ask them? Just ask each
that's
individual
fine.
Muslim.
Yeah, that's fine. But
how
what
they
do we?
interpret that.
But what do we call what is actually being prescribed by the document?
You can make a list of moral views out of it. You don't have to give it a name per se. You know, you could go through the just like I went through this transcript of your conversation with Smokey. You could go through the Quran and create a list of views that are a list of moral views that are implied by Muhammad. You know, you could do something like that and ask them ask any individual Muslim point by point. Do you agree with this point? Do you agree with this? Am I accurately summarizing this point? You know, you could ask them one by one. Now, typically, you're going to have people who interpret certain parts of the Quran differently than the way you think is the plain meaning of the words, right? I'm familiar with Sam Harris, all right? So I'm familiar with Sam Harris and the ex-Muslims that he promotes. So I'm familiar with all the arguments that he tends to make. And this is one of the arguments that he does tend to make. I just want you to be careful about declaring people as inconsistent or self-contradictory until they've explicitly said the contradictory things. You have to actually wait for them to contradict themselves instead of just assuming they've contradicted themselves simply because they self-describe as a Muslim and yet they're not violent. And you know.
Yeah, that's fair. But if someone says that the Quran is without error, and then you point out something that they disagree with in the Quran, then that is a contradiction, isn't it?
You have to ask them, is that an error?
Yeah.
Like you literally, that's all you would have to just word it as a question. That's all I'm asking you to do. It's like, just, if you think you've caught them in the contradiction, ask them if they can see the contradiction, or if they instead say, no, that's not an error. That's, I would call, you know, I interpret it this way instead, or whatever. All right. Anyway.
Yeah, I just think it's fair to call the religion of the Quran Islam.
But that would mean that it's your interpretation that goes, and people cannot disagree with your interpretation. That's what that would mean.
It's more, I can disagree with things that are in the Quran, but it says what it says.
Oh, that's a tautology. That's not. All right, let's move on. The political side of Islam is oppressive. So Islamism is oppressive. You seem to believe it's morally bad for a person to oppress others. So yeah, this is similar to the other position that I thought you implied. But it's not just the political side of Islam that's oppressive. That's oppressive in your view, right? Because it's possible for Christians to be oppressive as well, right? What about like
politically and
like
socially, like as in a home life? Yeah.
Like if we're going to call something, you know, the political side of Islamism, then why can't we have a word like Christianism? And Christianism would be defined as when a Christian is trying to force Christianity and Christian values over people and create more like a theocracy against their will using the political process or something like that. They try to pass laws that enforce Christianity, right? That
Yeah,
that
I
would
don't.
be oppressive in your view,
I
right?
don't see why not. People
All
might
right, so then
disagree on what word to use. I
there's no
think
need
that
to
the ancient Jews, that's what they were doing in the Old
so then
Testament.
there's no need to single out Islam here. Uh, all right, so let's see.
Yeah,
The left.
I had a long discussion with Smokey about how oppressive his viewpoints were. So
Oh, really?
yeah,
Um. Okay, but it wasn't in this discussion.
no,
Um.
no.
So
In this one, I was trying to find points of agreement.
right, right. All right, so here you implied the left only sees things through the lens of victim versus oppressor. Did you miss? Is that an accurate summary of your
Uh,
position?
some segment of the left, don't
The
know
left.
what
Oh,
we should call it, the SJWs, or there is a section of the left that does do that. Yeah, it's hard to define though, or it's hard to label more accurately.
fascinating. So you would say that there are people who only see things through the lens of victim versus oppressor. They're not able to see things any other way.
Pretty much. Whereas victims are morally righteous, and the only other thing is an oppressor who is morally unrighteous.
As opposed to your view, which is what?
That there are.
Oppressors are sometimes righteous.
No, I think by definition an oppressor is not righteous. But there are oppressive victims and there are non oppressive victims.
Oh, oh, okay. Let me see. First of all, I'm taking issue with this word only here. All right. So you said pretty much when I asked you directly. Um,
Well, I think it's definitely a strong force in communism where there are
in your definition
capitalists.
of communism, under your
Yeah.
definition of communism.
Mm-hmm. Uh, and the historical political regimes that we label communism. You can say that wasn't real communism, and we can argue about that. But such as the Russian communism, there was either the people being oppressed by the rulers, or there were the rulers, and there was no in between. There was people who owned stuff, and they're oppressors, and then there's the working class, who are all victims of the owners, the ownership class.
And you're saying that's the wrong way, that's a wrong lens to see things in.
Yeah.
What's the correct lens?
Well, that's pretty complicated. I mean, that's an all-encompassing kind of question.
So you attribute the complicated views to yourself and the other centrists, and you accuse leftists, you accuse the left or portions of the left as only seeing things in a simplistic way.
Yeah. And I think there are portions of the right that see things in a simplistic way, like God
But
said
you didn't say
so.
that here.
I
Is there a
I
portion of the
probably
right?
I
Is
did.
there a portion of the far right that only sees things through the lens of victim versus oppressor?
I don't think so. But their simplistic view would be something like God said so, therefore it's correct. That would be more common on the right.
So then, would you say that that would be morally bad?
to agree with that position. I think
Here,
that
like
that's
number 27 I have here is, it is morally bad for a person to see things through only one lens.
It depends. Like if your lens is, I only see things through the lens of truth. Well, that's pretty all-encompassing. But there are multiple facets of what is true. Like you can't just state something is true and understand what someone's talking about by that. So you'd have to break it down into multiple, I suppose, perspectives or lenses. I think what that's getting at is that the truth is just complicated. It's not simple. It's not black and white. It's not God said so, therefore it's okay. And it's not you were pushed around and bullied, therefore you're right. There are shades of gray, whereas a bully can become a bully. And in fact, that's often what happens is cycles of abuse. People who are abused often become abusers themselves.
All right, hold on. So you're saying so you wouldn't word it this way. So you would say that this is an inaccurate summary of your position, that it is morally bad for a person to see things through only one lens.
I think it's inaccurate to look at something through only one lens. Or through a simplistic lens, let's say. I think you're prone to mistakes when you are simplistic in your views.
Fascinating.
Or rigid in your views.
Because I would say that simplicity versus complexity, it's not always the case.
Well, it's hard to
One is
measure
not
too.
necessarily harder. One is not necessarily better than the other.
I think
sometimes there are simple things. Sometimes the simple answer is, or the simple explanation is the better explanation. Sometimes the complex explanation is the better explanation.
Yeah, I think it's best to kind of strike a balance, because if you get too simplistic, it just becomes too rigid and there's not enough nuance. If it gets too complicated, it just gets convoluted and too difficult to understand, and can equally lead to just kind of garbling. And
I think you've contradicted yourself again. How is it that you can say, all right, now you're saying it's possible to be too complex?
Of course.
That seems to go. No, you're saying, of course, as if.
There's always a balance point. You never want to go too far to one side.
Why do you keep making it such that the center is the peak, the center? Whereas a minute ago, you were saying that you shouldn't see things through one lens, or you shouldn't see things simplistically because it's not necessarily the truth. You like to get at the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're trying to get at the truth and simplicity is getting in the way of that, then clearly you think the truth is more towards the complex end. And yet now you're saying there's such a thing as too much complexity.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily more true because it's more complex.
What if the truth is over to the complex?
It might be.
All right, so...
But it's like, I don't think that. So the right wing is too simplistic for me, and the left wing is too simplistic for me.
Such that the center is a peak of morality,
but
right?
together they make sense. Like just believing that fairness is the only thing that exists.
In what way am I simplistic?
Well, I think it's simplistic to say that the left wing is all that is good.
That's an inaccurate summary of my position.
Okay. I thought you said that being further left is maximizing the good positions and the perfect positions.
Yeah, that's good. That's better. All right, so in the same way, you think that the good qualities are found more in the center, right?
I think in general there is a balance point. Yeah. In general, it seems to be true that whenever there's a controversy, there's usually not one side that's totally correct. There's usually nuance and points that both sides can make. And the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Usually.
Yeah, there it is.
Usually.
Oh boy. All right, so
people tend to get polarized.
What does that even mean? All right. Anyway, you say polarize as if that's a bad thing. I think.
Well, it can lead to closed-mindedness, is kind of the point.
If a person says something morally,
but again, you can be you can be too closed-minded, and you can also be too open-minded, so that your brain falls
come on,
out.
make up your mind. If you're going to say if you're going to imply that something is morally bad, why do you later feel the need to say that the opposite of that thing is also morally bad?
The opposite extreme? I think
it's how you're framing. You're trying to frame things one way, and then you turn around.
Extremes are usually bad. It's being too hot will kill you, and being too cold will kill you.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is there's a tendency for you to say that one thing is morally bad without saying that the opposite of that thing is also morally bad. You tend to just say the one half of it. And so that's a tendency in your speech that is misleading me to some degree. Okay?
Okay.
Since it seems your intent is to express an equivalence on both sides. Okay.
Well, even I don't tend to be balanced right in the middle, at least if we're going by any of these political tests. I tend to lean toward on one side or the other.
Yeah. The left is probably unable to recognize what an oppressor actually is. This is ridiculous. But would you say that that's an accurate summary of your position?
Yeah, and I think it's people are susceptible to supporting things that they don't realize are authoritarian.
All right, so is this an example of you explicitly saying the left when you also attribute this quality to the right?
Yeah. I think that I didn't say that it only exists on the left, but we were discussing my criticisms of the left, so the right wing didn't tend to come up a whole lot, because I have a whole other slew of things to say about that.
Mm-hmm. So, but earlier you did make a distinction between the left and the right, in that it is the left that only sees things through the lens of victim versus oppressor, whereas the right does not only see things through that lens.
I
Will
think
you
they would.
similarly will you similarly claim that is the right probably is able to recognize what an actual oppressor is?
I think they're more susceptible to trusting authoritarian oppressors on the basis that they're justified by their authority. Like, oh, that's the president. You can't, or you just obey the police because they're the police, or just obey
All
God
right,
because
so
he's God. Whereas the left will say, just obey us because we're the victims.
no, let's stick with one thing at a time. So, would you say the left and the right are probably unable to recognize what an actual oppressor is?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that generally, as a libertarian, I think most people are unable to recognize that they are being oppressed. I think America's pretty good, but people are still
What?
being oppressed.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You talking about the oppressed. This is amazing.
Why is that?
I mean, you think you're able to identify the oppressed. It's clear that you were careful not to call those people victims. I suppose that's one consistency. You're
No,
not
they
going
can
to
be
call them
victims.
victims.
The
Wait,
oppressed are
whoa, whoa,
the
whoa,
oppressed are
whoa.
victims.
Whoa, whoa. Do you really intend to say that? Those are what you call legitimate victims?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Uh,
This is amazing. That's
that
amazing.
seems like the definition of oppressed.
Well, I mean, I couldn't have known what your definition was until you explicitly stated it. So
Well,
I guess it's good we found out.
I try to use English dictionary definitions so that there's less
Oh, wait a
need
minute. Hold on
to clarify.
hold on a second. I think I misattributed that position to you when in fact it was Smokey who implied that particular view. Um, the left is probably unable to recognize what an oppressor actually is. That was from Smokey's
Okay.
quote. So that was my mistake.
I think that there
You
is
you
a
may have been agreeing with him, but I didn't write that down.
I think there are elements on the left that will lead to certain that will lead to people on the left in a certain way to not be able to identify oppressor. That exists on all spectrums, but there are certain ways. There are certain things that left-wing people are more susceptible to than right-wing people, but it can lead to the same end result of them trusting someone who really shouldn't be trusted. But the tactics that or the causes of that may be slightly different because they're susceptible to different I don't know if I want to say tricks, but they're susceptible to different fallacies, I guess. In general.
So, I mean, every time you mention the left, I'm just thinking, what is it that you would attribute to me? But
Well, I'm not sure. I'm
so
largely
the
I'm
things.
largely
Hold on.
speaking from
Well,
personal experience.
yeah, and isn't that a problem? So, like the thing that you tend to say is bad on the left, in general, I'm more uh, like when you said that there's an element of the left that uh, sees things through one lens or something, and you're willing to call those SJWs, like those are bad types of people. That's SJWs are not. See, I don't necessarily see it the way you do. Okay, And so those
Well,
attributes are also going to be a part of my framework, my worldview to some degree. And
yeah, you
so
probably
it's
share
like,
some of them.
right.
Um, and I know I used to basically be an SJW, and I know what my influences were, and they were not right wing political theory. It was things on the left wing that I saw as left wing and discussed in left wing political circles, and I continue to see only coming from the left. Whereas I see problems on both sides, but I see different problems.
Anyway, so let's see. As for a position, it seems that you actually implied it is illogical for a person to participate in the oppression Olympics, in which one competes for who has the greatest victim status. All right. Is that, would you say that that's illogical, or would you say it's morally bad, or what?
I think that it's at least a waste of time. I think it's probably morally bad. It, assuming it is an actual competition, I think that people aren't necessarily competing, but there is people out there who are competing. Like, I'm the bigger victim. Listen to me.
Um, all right. What about it is illogical for a person to feel bad for victims and do things in their favor, like not knocking out their enemies?
I don't think that that's illogical. I think it's illogical when you've misidentified an enemy or an oppressor, and that's the problem. Is I want to minimize these misidentifications because knocking out or attacking people should be minimized. Victimhood should be minimized. Oppression should be minimized. But if you, again, like I said, the abused can often become the abuser, and so it's important to break that cycle of abuse.
All right, so there's so much. Okay, you just said so. And it's like you don't need to connect those two things. You could have just stopped at, you could have just said abuse, it is morally bad for a person to abuse someone,
Mm-hmm.
and just left it there. You didn't have to say, you didn't have to say the abused often become the abusers.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore,
I think it's
abuse is, you should
because
stop it.
the context is about people who've been abused who become abusers.
Sounds like you're talking about the victimhood narrative in different words.
Victim, abused, oppressed, they're all pretty much synonymous, I think.
So
Oppression is abuse.
again, so I suppose once again, you're implying that if someone is abused, you gotta watch out. You gotta be suspicious of them
No, not
because
necessarily.
because um, just like with victims, like if a victim, if a legitimate victim says that they are a victim, then they are using, then you are worried that they are faking it, that they are just faking it to get power or something.
Actually, that's probably the least likely scenario. There probably were a legitimate victim. I think that we should have the tools to be able to break that cycle and not become so resentful that we then become abusers ourselves. It's like those who fight monsters
Are you
should be careful to not become monsters themselves. It
are
happens.
you in danger of becoming an oppressor?
I think we all are.
Whoa,
I think
whoa,
we're all
whoa, not
susceptible.
me.
All right.
All right,
I guess
everyone except me.
okay.
Okay.
You're
Now,
perfect. We
so I
understand that, but
exactly. Okay, exactly. So
I think that a lot of people are susceptible to wrath and revenge and um, overreacting, and I think we've all done it. I think we've snapped at people who may not have deserved it, or perhaps we snapped at someone because of
again,
something they did in the past. And
you're describing. You're saying those things. They seem to involve in emotion. Um,
yeah, I think we should be in control of our emotions.
but I would expect a person like you to not even acknowledge emotion. That you you're implying that you yourself have acted emotionally and that you are in danger of acting emotionally again. That you might be in the throes of emotion right now, heck. And yet I expected you, from what you said earlier, that actually you don't feel any. You're the kind of person who just cares about the truth in opposition to emotions.
Not in opposition at all.
So are you familiar with
It's,
Sam Harris?
of course, yeah.
Are you aware? So you're familiar with the way he speaks, his tone as
Yeah.
he debates,
Yeah.
and that he accuses people of being emotional when they are disagreeing with him.
I think I've
Okay,
seen that.
so um, so kind of like him, I would expect you to not describe your own actions as not describe your own actions as emotional. You know, because he tends to uh, claim that he's just being rational and he doesn't show emotion, or for the most part, he implies that he. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I try not to
You're
be. I think it's good to try not to let emotions rule you and let
and
logic rule
besides
you.
and besides, I don't think it's possible to scientifically prove that a person is or is not feeling an emotion.
Yeah, I think that's an
So
internal thing that you need to figure out in your own mind.
so there's no point in even debating about emotions, in my view, because it will just go in circles where you're accusing someone of being emotional, of feeling some emotion,
Yeah,
and they might deny it.
I try to be as take someone's argument at face value, like give them charitable good faith interpretation. They might be emotional at the same time, but I'm going to try and skip over like you're just being emotional right now and skip over those accusations and just try and focus on the truth value of what they're saying regardless of their emotional state. And sometimes that's bad tactic because if someone is emotional, they're going to be less receptive, and sometimes you have to know when to throw in the towel. People in
All right, so
relationships would know what that's like,
okay,
but
so earlier you implied that sometimes people act out of wrath, or that they might snap at people.
mm-hmm,
And to me, I mean, of course, wrath would be anger, and that's an emotion.
mm-hmm.
And so you are ascribing emotions to people as if it's morally bad to act out of wrath, when in fact, okay, so I think that that's a contradiction. Um, and
Why is that?
also, uh, you claimed just now that you tend to skip over the part where they're acting emotional, and yet earlier you was You accuse people of acting emotionally.
Yeah,
Basically, that's it.
I can. I will
So
have my
I would
opinion.
expect you. I would expect you to excise all words involving emotion from your vocabulary and just not even speak about it,
when I'm talking
considering that you're.
when I'm talking to that person, but I do kind of have suspicions about people's motivations, and I think you can talk about that.
All right.
Especially if I'm talking about my own personal experience, because I know I have been motivated by emotion. I know, and
All right.
people will explicitly state that they feel this and this and that.
Yeah, if they explicitly state it, then you can prove that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so that's okay to debate. When a
Yeah.
person explicitly says something like that.
But if I'm
Because
debating that person, I try to really not focus on that. If
All
for
right.
nothing else, but it's a time waster, because you say, "Oh, you're just
Yeah.
pissed off." I'm not pissed off. Yeah, you are. Like, it's just pointless.
Okay, so um, to feel bad for victims, like, okay, you believe it's legitimate. Well, first of all, to feel bad for victims, that's a problem right there. And do things in their favor, like knocking out their enemies. Okay, so knocking out their enemies. Um,
Yeah, I don't think it's
these are your
illogical.
words. These are okay. I took these out of quotes from you, so these are your words, and so it's
Did
going to be
I?
according to your definitions of these words.
Where did I say it's illogical to feel bad for
You
victims?
didn't say illogical. That's me trying to summarize your position, but
Okay.
you did say knocking out their enemies. You said knocking out their enemies as if that's a bad thing to do. For
Okay.
example, um, you're talking about the oppression Olympics. Yeah, you basically have more points the more you can say, "Oh, I've been oppressed," and people feel bad for you, so they want to do things in your favor and knock out your enemies and do stuff for you.
Mm-hmm.
You say that as if it's a bad thing
No, that's just a
for
matter of
people to.
fact. No, I'm actually making no judgment there. People will feel bad for victims and want to do things in your favor. That's not a judgment.
Mhm.
I'm not saying you're necessarily good or necessarily bad for doing it. What I'm
Okay.
saying is that can be taken advantage of.
All right, that's fine.
And for good or bad. I mean, you can. I think it's bad form to emotionally appeal, but I think that people do make appeals to emotion for good things. They do it for bad things too. I wouldn't ever make an emotional appeal. At least I try not to, because I just don't think that it helps. I don't think that it. I just try to evaluate the truth value.
See, there you go. You did it again. Okay, so let's go on. Um,
What's wrong with
let's
that?
see. I've pointed it out. Okay, victims have a tremendous amount of power, some of which is logical, some of which. Um, let me see. You literally said some of it is not unjustified.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Vic, this is so strange the way people like you think. So let's say it's me and you on a deserted island, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose I were to, um, suppose I were to shove you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Suppose I were to shove you. In that situation, I would, I don't even want to say that sentence. I would be one thing and you would be another thing, okay? Um, would you say that you are the one with the tremendous amount of power?
Uh, Not necessarily. If you felt bad about it, or if there were other people around who felt bad about it, then I would.
Let's leave feelings out of it. All right. All right. Let's try again.
Well, the feelings are part of the reality. If someone feels
Whoa, whoa,
bad,
whoa, whoa, whoa! You just said feelings are part of reality.
of course.
Whoa,
If
whoa.
someone feels bad for
Okay,
you,
so
they will act on your behalf.
I thought you were going to say that you care. You're going to skip over the feelings. You're not going to care. It's you want to care. You care about what's the truth, what the
Uh-huh.
facts are.
Yeah, but that
Okay.
doesn't mean everyone's going to act like that.
Let's try again. All right. Me and you
Me,
on an island with one other person.
okay.
Okay. And I push you.
Okay.
Okay. Would you say you have a tremendous amount of power in that situation?
It depends. Does that person side with you or do they side with me?
So you're saying it depends.
That third person. Well, if there's
Okay.
only one other
So
person, then yeah,
oh,
it depends on whose side they take. If there's a
okay,
bunch
okay,
of
okay.
people, then some of them will side with me and some of them will side with you.
All right, all right. Let's change it again. It's you and me on an island with two other people. Or okay, okay, fine, 10, however many other people you want, okay?
Okay.
And I shove you. Half of the people take your side, half of the people take my side, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Would you say that you have a tremendous amount of power in that situation?
If they're willing to get into a fight with the other people for me, sure.
So it still depends.
Yeah. If they're just going to stand around, like what do they do in this scenario?
All right. So I think I think that should be enough for you to see the problem that I have with this statement here. Can you see it?
Uh,
The idea
if
that
the
victims
statement
having
is
a,
that all victims everywhere all the time necessarily have a tremendous amount of power no matter what the circumstance, then that's not the statement I was making.
ah, okay, okay. So how would you reword that?
Hmm. Possibly victims have access to a tremendous amount of power, or they can have access or they can have tremendous amounts of power.
Okay.
Because there's obviously victims that are just victims, and uh, either no one can come and rescue them in time, or no one cares.
Okay. Okay. So I think that cleared it up right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you were to apply that analysis to all kinds of other situations, I think that would be much better for you know, because I think it's typical of people like you to not realize what's going on
Well,
in those kinds of situations.
it was never an absolute statement, but
Let's
just
see.
the reality that you can garner power with victimhood
Uh,
after the fact, at least.
oh, I've been oppressed, and people feel bad for you, and they want to do things in your favor and knock out your enemies and do stuff for you. So I mean, it does have a tremendous amount of power. Some of it's not unjustified.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm all I'm basing this on is the exact quotes from that other video. So it seems like you've made a clarification here, and I just want you to know that that clarification is huge for me. Okay,
Okay.
it makes a big difference. Okay, you may not fully see it right now, but let's see the next one. It's it seems you implied it's morally good for a person to stand up for victims.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine. I
I
guess.
suppose
Yeah.
after this conversation, I suppose maybe it's legitimate victims. Um,
Yeah, you could add that, but I think just calling someone a victim implies that it's legitimate.
legitimate, yeah. In your your definition of victim is that,
You can have
yeah,
a
okay.
the
But
the 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 characterization may be false, but if you're saying you're a victim, you're saying that you really are a victim.
okay. Would you say it's morally bad for a person to exploit the idea of standing up for victims?
Um, to exploit the idea, I think maybe imprecise. I think it's morally bad for a person to exploit people who want to stand up for victims. Even if it's as simple as calling around and saying, "Hey, donate to the rainforest," but you pocket all the money. You're exploiting people who feel bad for the people whose land is lost in the rainforest, or the animals who are victimized by the deforestation. But you're taking advantage of their generosity and charity for your own selfish gain, and I think that's morally bad.
We were talking
At
about
least if it's dishonest.
victims.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think animals can be victims. I think people living in the rainforest are victims of deforestation.
all
Obviously,
right.
there are more complex examples than that.
All right. Let's move on. Um, like it seems like what you were getting up, what you were, the overall point you were making is that there are people on the left. Hmm,
The right definitely does it too, but they do it in different ways. They'll say Christians are being oppressed. We have to stand up for those victims. The victims that they use and exploit would be different depending on your political spectrum, I think.
why do you call it exploitation? Like, isn't it possible that they legitimately have a different moral view from you?
Yeah, of course.
So then, why would you call them exploiters? Why can't they just legitimately be standing up for what they think are victims?
I don't think there's a judgment in the exploitation. I mean, you can exploit something for good. You can take advantage of something that's good.
Really?
What else would I
Because
say? It
a
tends to
a couple
have.
minutes ago, you used exploit. You've been using exploit with a negative connotation this whole time, and you equate exploit with to take advantage of. And so again, it seems like up until this moment, up until this minute, you've been using exploit and to take advantage of as having negative connotations, when in fact what you really intend is to say that it's a spectrum from bad on the left and bad on the right, and the center is somewhere where there's a peak.
Well, it might be
So,
off the charts. It's not necessarily in the center. But
all right. Anyway, let's moving on. Let's see.
would you prefer I just say to make use of?
The whole point that you're making is strange to me because it sounds like what you're saying is you see people on the left who believe that some action is morally bad. They make enough. They accuse someone of doing a morally bad action that negatively impacts what they call a victim.
Mm-hmm.
They stand up for this victim, and you, watching this unfold, accuse the people standing up for the victim as exploiting this situation in the most sinister way, in the most insidious way possible.
Well, I explicitly said it's not necessarily, at least consciously, insidious.
Wait a minute, wait a minute.
They could believe it.
When we're talking about what's explicit,
They could believe it. Most of them do believe it.
We should stand up for victims, absolutely. But it's, or maybe it was Smokey who said absolutely. But it's exploited in the most insidious way possible. In the most insidious possible way. So it sounded like you were saying standing up for victims is exploited in the most insidious possible way. So like,
yeah, it can
when someone on the left is standing up for a victim, for what they call a victim, you're going to tend to accuse them of exploiting the situation in the most insidious possible way.
Well, it's a case-by-case basis. I try to talk to people on the right from the right and on the left from the left. So
Right.
would you agree that it's insidious for someone to exploit people's fears about immigrants or fears about gang violence to suppress immigration?
Okay, so I have a problem with exploit in that question.
Okay.
So I would want a more detailed definition of what is meant by exploit. And so, like right there, you implied exploit. You implied it as if you use it as if it has a negative connotation. When earlier you said it could be a good thing. You know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sometimes you can exploit things for good.
How about I
And
say, is it insidious to make use of people's fear of gang violence to suppress immigration from Mexico?
No, I still have a problem with that question. I'm liberal. I'm on the left. I'm actually on the left. And so you could probably predict what my position is on stuff like that based on that. Um, and I wouldn't call it insidious. I would tend to just stick with, morally bad. Mm, and to use people's fear, like, first of all, you would have to. Is it possible to prove that a person is using someone's fear, and so on down the line? I would take apart that question, and I would want to make sure everything is precisely defined before I would give a straight answer.
The definition of insidious is just proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects.
Are you getting that from a dictionary?
Yeah.
There's no. Okay.
That's what I mean.
Okay. As long as it's what you as long as you're adopting that definition.
Yeah.
Let me see. All right, and we're gonna get to the fun stuff now.
But you would agree that
I take that back.
politicians can use people's fears in insidious ways, right?
Is it possible to prove that a person is using someone's fear?
Yeah.
Because the moment you say, once you recognize that fear is an emotion, and I've already told you that I don't think it's possible to scientifically prove that person is or is not feeling an emotion, then the question needs to be more, better stated in order to be worth debating.
I think if people
you would
say
have to
that,
reword it. You would have to.
I think if they're specifically saying we need to be worried about this, and then the constituents are explicitly saying we are worried about this, I think that we can reasonably conclude that they are worried about it.
Well, leaving the conclusion behind, I are you trying to you're trying to create a hypothetical that would match what you call exploitation. But
Sure.
yeah, let's see. Uh
So you don't think that any politicians have exploited certain viewpoints of the population?
Again, when you say okay, I do think that politicians have used public opinion. How about that?
Sure.
Okay. And when I say use, I simply mean, hey, here's a poll saying 60% of people, 60% of Americans believe this. I believe politicians have done that.
Mm-hmm. Do you
Where
believe
they
that they've...
point to a poll and they say, this is what this percentage of people believe. I do believe they have done that.
Do you
Now,
think they've used...
if you were to call that exploitation, I would have a problem with that word.
Do you think that they've used that kind of support to do harmful things, whether intended or not?
Harmful things. That's again with intent. When it gets down to it, I don't think you can scientifically prove what a person intends to do
Yeah.
because it's a mental action. Your intents are
Yeah.
locked in your mind, and I don't think we can prove those mental actions yet. But you can prove that person claimed to intend something.
Yeah. But you can prove the effects that happened, whether they
All
were
right, so
harmful or
then
not.
we have to reword things in terms of the effects then.
Well, yeah,
And so
that's what I asked about. I said whether there is intent or not, do you believe that they have used those opinions or popular support in order to accomplish things that had harmful effects?
well, we would have to go through. Um,
Or to justify
I
those
wanna-
things?
I wouldn't want to necessarily say yeah, because then you could claim that, then you could claim things about me. Yeah, no comment.
Do you think Trump has ever used people's opinions to accomplish something or to justify something harmful?
Let's move on.
I mean, I do. I think all politicians on all sides do that.
Oh, all sides. Do you realize? See, that's a problem that I have with centrists. You say all sides as if there's a moral equivalence, but you're forgetting.
I'm not
that
equivocating.
You're somewhere. You are somewhere. You too are somewhere. All right. And so it's kind of like you're implying that you yourself have done the morally bad thing that you're accusing others of.
Yeah.
Okay,
think
so you're admitting to acting hypocritically.
not personally, or I mean,
You-
in the past, I have acted hypocritically at times. Yes, I think all of us have. I don't think this opinion is hypocritical. That I think people probably have used libertarianism that accomplished something that was harmful. I think people have used Democratic platforms to accomplish something that's harmful. I think they've used Republican platforms to accomplish something harmful.
So there's the equivalence. That's what I mean by equivalence. And
They're
so
not
I have
of-
a problem.
They're not
Every
of
time
equal
you-
harm, though.
Every time you bring up an equivalence, I'm going to have a problem with it. All right, so that's one thing.
It's an equivalence
another
just
thing-
because it's harmful? I'm not getting what the objection is.
I'm on the left. Okay.
So the left can do
So
no wrong?
wait, hold on. So you could probably predict that any time that you imply that there's an equivalence on the left and the right, you can predict that I'm going to have a problem with those kinds of statements. So it shouldn't be surprising to you. All right? It should just roll off your back.
But
Um,
it's not an equivalence. It's just saying that they can both do harm, and I'm not even saying that it's equal harm. Is it possible for someone on the left to do something bad?
why don't
Or
you
is
just
or is the
make
left
your question? How about
is the
why
left
don't you
by
just
definition just good?
why don't you just make your question specifically about me? How about that?
Well, I don't really have any questions specifically about you.
Why don't you ask me if it's possible for me to do something that's harmful?
Is it?
You see, it depends on, like, okay, so first of all, when you say harmful things, um it sounds like I could just call those morally bad things, right? And so the question would then become, is it possible for me to do morally bad things? And and so that's kind of like a one of those philosophical. It's almost sounding like a philosophical question, where what I would tend to do, because I say that I think it's morally bad to act hypocritically, and by the definition of to act hypocritically, what I mean is basically like if I say something is morally bad, then I must not do it. So by definition, I'm claiming that I don't do morally bad things, right? And so then if you were to ask me, Chris, is it possible for you to do a morally bad thing? Well, I suppose like it's physically possible for me to act hypocritically. It's a physical possibility when you start talking about the small percentages in quantum mechanics, and I suppose it's a physical possibility for me to not work hard at work. But in the sense that I'm stating that I'm not going to be doing those things. And so in that sense, it's not possible. You see, I'm telling you upright, like
Well, if you're right, you're right. Is kind of what you're saying.
that would be a top. I'm saying that it depends on what you mean by probably. Are you acting like a philosopher, or am I allowed to say, no, I'm not going to act morally bad?
I don't. I think you can say that you're going to try not to act morally bad.
Fascinating.
I don't
So you're
think you
making,
can put yourself above making mistakes. So
okay, so you've changed, the moment you change wording, that's going to introduce new variables. So now we have to define a mistake. It seems like you replaced doing morally bad things with doing mistakes, and it
well,
seems, I don't think that's,
doing morally bad thing is a mistake. So if contradict yourself, and you don't realize it, is it possible for you to contradict yourself and not realize it?
well, if I ever do, I invite people to try to find the contradictions in my statements. Um, I don't think I will. I don't think people will actually find actual contradictions. And that's the kind of thing I'm going to be debating people over.
Ever again
Um,
in your life?
See, now you're starting to sound more like a philosopher. You're taking is it possible? You're taking the philosopher, you're turning it into a philosophy question. And
Well,
that's what I was asking you about before.
I'm very
Am I allowed,
confident.
am I allowed to say what my position is? Or do I have to start talking about quantum probabilities with you?
I'm not talking about quantum probability. From my point of view, I'm very confident that I will make at least one mistake in my life, in the rest of my life. I'm pretty
So
confident.
you're not even going to swear off acting hypocritically.
I'm going to swear it off. I'm going to attempt to not act hypocritically, but I'm pretty confident I will make a mistake and probably act hypocritically at least one more time in my life. I'm going to try and minimize that as much as possible. But going from my track record, I don't know anyone who's perfect. I don't know anyone
except
who.
me.
Of course, yeah. Um, but
All right.
I don't think that. Are you being sarcastic when you say that, or are you
I've
being
done this
legitimate?
ever since my political awakening. I think it's like
So you actually
this.
think
Hold
you're
on a
perfect?
second. Hold on. Let me say something. So the thing I showed you at the beginning about logical debate, I came up with that. I came up with those rules after reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Okay,
Okay.
so I understood her argument better than I think other people have understood her argument, because I take her argument to be that it is possible. The core of her argument is non-contradiction. There are certain like principles in the book that she tries to lay out, and she tries to express that there are certain rules of debate that people on the left are continue people on the left half of the spectrum continuously ignore. There are certain rules that everyone should abide by, but people on the left half of the spectrum ignore. And so I took those rules from that book and condensed it down. And I believe that since that moment, since then, uh, I have been in perfect conformity with those rules, in a sense. You know what I mean? In that sense, I'm perfect. Just
But
like
I
the heroes
also
of those books.
I also believe in non-contradiction. So am I perfect?
This you yourself are literally you literally said that you will at least one time in your life you are not you are going to act hypocritically.
Probably.
So it's up to you to answer your own question. You
But
you
you
told it's like you told me yourself that you're going to contradict yourself or you're going to act hypocritically in the future.
I'm going to
So it's like
try
heck.
I'm going to try not to, but I know that I'm not a perfect machine. And I
All
don't
right.
think
Well,
you are
this
either.
wait a minute. Wait a minute. Since when did you, why are you well, the sky is blue. That doesn't contradict anything that I said. I didn't claim to be a perfect machine. I'm claiming to be a perfect human in the sense that I do not contradict myself. Let's stick with humanity. Okay, I'm a
You
human, not a
but
machine. Okay?
I think that I don't contradict myself either, and I have
Okay,
thought
so
that
then
I
leave it
wasn't
there.
contradicting myself while I
All
was
right.
contradicting myself in the past. So I know that I might do it again. I'm going to try not to, and I assume you're going to try not to. I don't believe that either of us are going to successfully do that with a 100% success rate.
All right, let's move on then. Um, yeah, I simply disagree.
You think you'll
So,
never make a logical mistake ever again?
logical mistake. Uh, so, a logical mistake is different. Because earlier, when you were saying mistake, you were implying
Well, a
that by
contradiction is
mistake
a
you meant
logical
morally
mistake.
bad thing.
Well, morally bad is a contradiction and a logical mistake.
You're equating. See, now you're going back and equating all of these
No, it's
words.
a square
They
is a
seem to me, to
rectangle.
me, to
A square is
me,
a rectangle, and
these
and
seem to be different
contradictions
things.
are logical mistakes. Not all logical mistakes are contradictions, but all contradictions are logical mistakes.
Um,
So you think you're immune to that just because you've committed to not contradicting? Because if so, then I'm in the same boat because I've committed to not contradicting myself, and I'm gonna try.
really?
I'm gonna try really hard not to.
Okay, then stop there. All right, so let's see. A lot of minorities on the centrist or conservative side claim they only hear white people say they are offended. Uh, Let me see. You said you said I only hear people. The only people I ever hear this coming from is white people. Oh, you said that that's what they say. Okay. Uh, yeah, so it seems like in your experience, there are a lot of minorities on the centrist or conservative side that claim they only hear white people say that they're offended. Does that sound like something?
Like saying that they're offended on behalf of the minorities, but they're
Okay.
you know.
Okay. Okay, so would you say that a lot of minorities on the liberal side, a lot of minorities on the left claim they only hear white people saying they are offended on behalf of minorities or something?
Not the far left ones, I wouldn't think. But probably more centrist and right wing ones would.
Okay, let's see.
Or, I mean, I've seen people who I don't know their political affiliation who say, I only hear this from white people and not my own community.
Mm-hmm. All right, so
I think there is a problem with virtue signalers who take advantage of seeming to be virtuous.
not that that's a bad thing, right? Taking advantage.
Not
necessarily a bad thing.
No. But it can be used for insidious purposes.
Or good purposes.
Mm-hmm. And we have to be able to identify when someone is... Usually you don't virtue signal for good reasons.
Because it has a negative connotation, right?
Usually,
you've defined virtue signaling such that it has a negative connotation.
Usually you have to point out how virtuous you are if people don't already recognize it.
All right, so go ahead and say. So what is your definition of to virtue signal?
Basically to point out how good you are. And I would say with the connotation, how virtue signaling is typically used, it also implies that you're doing it for shallow purposes. Like you're doing it to make people think that you're virtuous and not just for the pure purpose of doing virtuous things.
Right. So could you...
Like you want the adoration, you want the praise. That's usually the implication.
That I'm asking... Remember, I asked you for your definition of virtue signaling.
How I use it is typically has that implication of you're doing it only for the praise.
Okay. So...
Because people typically virtuous people don't want to take credit for what they've done. They say, "Oh, don't thank me. It was the right thing to do." But then there are people who say, "Look at me, I am so virtuous." And that's
I literally
the
said
latter.
I'm perfect.
I know.
So would you accuse me of... So in your view, would you say that I was virtue signaling?
Depends. I think that
you would have to ascribe motive to me, right?
Yeah. It's hard to tell why you would say you're perfect. I think that that's not justifiable, but
even though I justified it, well, it's not justifiable in... You don't... Well, to you, you don't think it's justifiable, but you acknowledge that I justified it. I gave a reason, right?
I don't think it's a good reason.
Okay, as long as you admit that I gave a reason, as even though you were not convinced by it.
Yeah, because that by that reason I'm perfect too, and we both have mutually contradictory positions, and so we can't both be perfect. So it's
Remember
a bad
the definition
reason.
of perfect. Remember the definition of perfect that I'm using here. I use it in a very specific way. Okay? Remember.
Which is?
So, what? Just think back. Okay. I said, in the sense that ever since I read Ayn Rand's book and wrote down the rules of logical debate, in the sense that I'm following those rules, and I don't think I've contradicted myself in that sense. In that sense, I'm perfect. Okay? It is possible for you to also follow these rules and in that sense be perfect. Okay? And that does not mean that there's a contradiction in the world. You know? It's possible for both of us
So do you mean
to be perfect in that sense.
Do you mean you always follow those rules without fail?
I wouldn't say that I always
You just generally adhere to
debate
these
with
rules?
people. When I'm like when I'm debating with people, I tend to follow the rules because they tend to have basically when both people are following the rules, the conversation I think tends to lead towards progress, towards mutual agreement. Okay, but I've found over the years that people are not willing to memorize the rules that I've written, and so I try to ease them into it by first of all me following the rule, and then slowly trying to get them to recognize that that's what I'm doing and that they should also do it. So when I'm talking to strangers, when I'm debating with them about politics and stuff, I tend to start off by following the rules myself, by being nonviolent and all of that stuff. But then there are also times when I am just chatting with people when I'm not being serious or something, And so I might speak of emotions or something when I'm speaking off the cuff, when I'm not being super serious about logical debating, In those times, I'm not following the rules of logical debate. So it's not, one of my moral views is not that it is morally good for a person to always use logical debate. That's not one of my moral views.
But
Okay.
Is that the definition of perfect?
I told you in what sense I am perfect. Why can't you understand?
I'm trying to clarify whether you're saying that you're following these precepts in general or always, because perfection, the general usage of the word implies kind of an absolute. So it would seem, unless you're using a much different definition, which you are, so I just need to clarify. It should be an easy yes or no.
Let me try to clarify.
Is it always or just generally?
Let me try to clarify, okay?
It's
Let me try to
should
clarify.
be simple to
All right.
answer. Is it always or not?
Remember, let me speak.
Yes or no?
All right, so you're interrupting. All right, so for example, I believe it's morally bad for a person to act hypocritically. Okay? So I don't act hypocritically. All right? And that's always. That's a moral view. The moral view that I hold is a lifelong commitment that I have. Okay? And
It's fair to say that you.
Let me finish.
You
I
try.
believe I follow it. Let me finish. I believe I follow it perfectly. All right. And when it comes to like working hard at work, I believe I regularly work hard at work. And that's the thing I'm committed to on a daily basis. Okay. So in that sense, I'm perfect. Okay. Um, what about, yeah, yeah, that's about, I think that does it. I don't act hypocritically. I work hard at work. Yeah, and I invite anyone to find, to try to find contradictions in my views. Okay, and I'll try to explain how those are not actual contradictions.
So is
Okay,
it, when you say you don't act hypocritically, is it fair to say you try to not act hypocritically, or that you
and then I
always,
succeed. I try and succeed in not acting hypocritically.
always?
Why you're turning into a philosopher again? Let me
Mm,
just. Why can't I
it
just use English? Let's get
that
away
is
from the
English.
philosophy.
That is English.
Let's get away from the philosophy
It's
and
not
just stick with colloquial.
philosophically. I
Let's
mean,
stick with colloquial English.
so you
Okay.
don't want to confirm or deny whether it's always or just most of the time.
I think I express myself accurately. I try and succeed in not acting hypocritically.
Do
I
you
try
do you
and
ever fail?
succeed.
It's a
Why do I
simple
have to?
question. Do you ever fail?
It follows though. It follows directly from what I just said. Why do I have to go through each point with you?
It's a very easy question to answer.
All right.
It doesn't seem like you want to confirm or deny that.
I believe it follows, and you're being pedantic by not understanding what
Well,
I'm trying to get at.
that's what this
You're,
whole
you're
thing
trying.
is you're trying to make me clarify my statements, and fair enough. I can always use clarification and use more precise language. I'm just asking the same of you.
The clarification is it's like by definition the case that if I say that I try to not act hypocritically, that I try not to act hypocritically, and I succeed in not acting hypocritically, then by definition, then that means always I succeed in not acting hypocritically.
Okay. That
Now,
clarifies things.
where no, it doesn't. How can that count as a clarification when it's by definition true? Is there a situation when someone
Because,
tries and succeeds at something but does not always succeed?
yes, I try and succeed a lot, and I try and fail a lot at the same thing.
So you're talking about there are separate trials, and you try and fail sometimes, and then you get up and you try and succeed, and then you get up and try and fail. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Sometimes I
Because
succeed at winning a
because
game.
I'm seeing it as a continuous lifelong thing, a continuous lifelong process. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so if I said I try and succeed at ladder golf, does that mean that I have tried and succeeded, or does that mean that I have never failed?
Ladder golf.
It's an ambiguous statement. It's just a game where you throw two balls connected to each other at a bar, at a ladder, basically.
All right,
It's the first game I thought of.
but
Uh,
okay, but still, yeah, that would be a strange
yeah, it's an ambiguous statement because it could mean that
analogy, a strange analogy to use there when I'm specific, when I've already told you, that I'm perfect in a certain sense.
it could apply
And
to a
of
video
course,
game. I try and succeed at video games. I try and succeed at the match. What does that mean? Does that mean I've never lost, or does that mean that I win sometimes?
those are literally not analogous to the whole point of the statements I'm making. I'm talking about lifelong commitments, and you're analogizing them to games that clearly have an endpoint, so that you could then get up and try again. All right. So anyway, let's move on. Some people join the mob of people standing up for victims, so the mob doesn't turn on them. Oh, wait a minute. There's another point. When you speak of minorities here, and you speak of white people. Isn't that like, identity politics?
Why would that be?
Because you said the words.
The words what? What makes something identity politics?
Well, I'm just asking you if it counts as identity politics to say certain words like minorities or white people or black people, because you've said those words. Does that count as identity politics to you?
No, I think identity politics is like a tendency for a specific demographic of race or religion or sex to form like coherent political opinions. And I think people are individuals, that there's not a monolithic black or white experience. Like there's not a monolithic male or female experience.
So later on, God dang it, coherent position. Isn't that what you explicitly said is not
Did I say
possible?
coherent or
cohesive?
I think I said cohesive, but that's what I meant. Like they all agree with each other. Like they have one monolithic position. Like to say that all gay people have a leftist opinion.
No, that sounds like a straw. But
Yeah, because
anyway,
there are log cabin Republicans.
then you're not arguing. Okay. All right. So let's flesh this out a little. Okay. So there are people. How about? Let me see how I should put this. There are people who say that it's identity politics to it's neither here nor there. Never mind. All right. So what about when we were talking about virtue signaling again?
Mm-hmm.
Now I think maybe has it been clarified that on the point of whether or not I was committing virtue signaling? Did we clarify that? Was I virtue signaling?
I don't think so. I think you were claiming to not make mistakes or not make logical errors like contradictions. I don't think that is moralistic enough to necessarily go into virtue signaling.
Okay, so what if I were to say,
I think you might be
suppose someone on the left were to say it is morally bad for a person to misgender a transgender person. What if I were to say that? And suppose I were to criticize someone, like if I were to see someone who misgendered someone, and I criticize that person, would you accuse me of virtue signaling?
Maybe, especially if you were doing it like in public.
What the heck? Okay, so whether or not it's done in public has something to do with your definition of virtue signaling, huh?
It could, because if you're doing it like to gain popularity,
It's not a. Okay,
then
so
that
you
would
believe
be
that's a thing.
then that would be virtue signaling.
What if I believe I already said that in this situation, in this hypothetical, I would believe it's morally bad for a person to misgender a transgender person.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I already started off with the stipulation that I would be holding that moral position. And then you try to inject into it somehow that I would be criticizing the other person, that if I criticize the other person in order to become popular, then it's virtue signaling. Could you clarify that for me? Like, if a person believes it's morally bad to do some action, why would you then try to claim that they're doing it, that they're criticizing people for popularity? Why would you even bother to make that jump?
I would probably never argue that to someone who I was arguing with. I would just argue the legitimacy of their points. But if there are people who there are indications that they're being disingenuous, or they're only holding certain positions because they're popular positions and they want people to see that, and that occurs.
See, those are the kinds of claims that you could not prove actually happen.
There are cases of that. I think, for example, Anita Sarkeesian, she said she had no idea. I'm not going to stop. She had said she had no idea what video games were. She just picked it to have something to complain about. She wasn't a gamer, and then she went on and disingenuously had this persona of a gamer chick because she was just finding something to complain about. It wasn't genuine. So we can call those kind of people, with all likelihood, they're just virtue signaling. They're just doing it to garner popularity.
You don't even realize what you've done there.
But if I were to debate her, I wouldn't waste time on that. I would just go for, hey, your points don't make sense.
But you've already accused her of multiple. You've already implied she's done multiple morally bad things. So that whole statement about Sarkeesian, you use words that have negative connotations and implied a bunch of things that she's done without even asking her first, does she believe that it's morally bad for a person to blank? You have to ask her that first.
Here's a better example.
Why, do you understand the principle, though?
Yes. How about a pastor who's preaching about anti-gay stuff, and he is secretly gay himself? Why is he preaching about not being? Why is he telling people not to be gay?
Why don't you just call that what it is? Why don't you just call it what it is instead of
hypocrisy?
Accusing him of virtue signaling. Yes, that would be an example of hypocrisy.
Virtue signaling is a form of hypocrisy. At least it can be.
So that's your definition then.
If we can confirm that he's being a hypocrite, we can confirm that he is in fact virtue signaling. We know that he's actually just saying this so that he can garner followers or keep followers, or
You can't. That's a jump. You have to ask him. You literally have to ask him, why are you doing it? Okay? And so it's like you're jumping and you're ascribing motives to people.
he wants people to think that he's not engaging in this thing that he says is wrong. So he's
That's
telling
simple-
people not to
that's
do it.
simple hypocrisy. All right, so
Yeah, it's
it's simple hypocrisy.
mhm.
So but earlier you were saying that an element of virtue signaling is doing it in public for publicity, for popularity, or something.
I suppose it could
And
be
it's-
one-on-one. You could be telling someone who you're trying to impress, "Oh, I volunteer with children in Africa. Like, oh, aren't I such a great person?"
And that would be virtue signaling to you.
Yeah. Do you agree that people do that? I think it's absurd if you can't recognize that that happens, that people try to impress each other with their deeds that they might not actually care about or do for the fact itself, but are doing it to impress others. This obviously happens in this world. People do that.
It's obvious. What's obvious to me is that you have a strange, you've come up with this strange definition that you're calling, a definition for virtue signaling.
Well, what would you say it is?
Wait a minute.
What's a better definition?
Hold on. When, on one hand, you're saying that they don't hold the underlying, they don't actually care about the underlying moral view.
Well, it's
And on
irrelevant
the other
if they
hand-
care or not.
Okay, so see, that sounds like it contradicts. Sounds exactly like you just contradicted yourself. Maybe I misheard, but
They might think it's a good thing. They might think it's a good thing, but they're
go back to my
saying
example.
it because they want people to recognize how virtuous
Let's
they
go
are.
back to my example. All right, let's take a leftist who believes it's morally bad for a person to misgender someone.
Hmm.
All right, and they see someone misgender someone, and they say, "Hey, that's morally bad. I am criticizing you for this." Okay.
Hmm.
Now,
What if a
you
corporation
said it's
does
possible. You said it's possible to virtue signal one-on-one,
that? Hmm.
right? So, would you count that as virtue signaling? If it's me and you on a deserted island, and I accuse you of misgendering me, and I say, "Hey, that's morally bad," and so I criticize you for that, would that count as virtue signaling under your definition?
By itself, no.
All right. Okay, it's you and me on a deserted island with another person. So there's a third person who's watching. All right. You misgender me. I say, "Hey, that's morally bad. I'm criticizing you for that." Does that count as virtue signaling?
By itself, no.
Even though there's another person watching?
Correct. You can.
Why wouldn't you simply accuse me of doing it for popularity?
Because just having a grievance is not virtue signaling.
So then all right, so what additional element on that island with the third person would be needed in order for that to become virtue signaling?
If you're trying to impress someone with how
would you-
virtuous you are. So do you think a corporation who doesn't give a shit at all, who's just going with the wind, who 50 years ago would have stood against gay marriage, and now it's just a corporation tweeting out, "Oh, Pride Month." Do you think that the people who own that corporation actually care about Pride Month,
It's a bad
or do you,
example.
Or do you think, why is that a bad example? That's precisely what I mean about virtue signaling. They're only tweeting it out so that people think that they're on the right side. They don't actually
Because a
care.
corporation is another person, first of all. I would want
It's
to
made up of people.
universalize the actions. Yeah, I would want to make those actions universalizable and start talking about individuals in the corporation or whatever. Um, so it sounded to me like you're making a distinction between saying an action is morally bad, saying an action is morally good. Okay, so what if I were to change my example so that instead of me saying, that's morally bad, since you don't seem to see that as easily being virtue signaling, what if I were to say some action is morally good? Okay, so me and you on a deserted island, all right, and I say, um, suppose I were to say it's morally good to hmm, to catch fish in the mornings. Yeah, for breakfast. It's morally good for a person to to wake up and catch fish in the morning for breakfast. Yeah, suppose I were to hold that view, and then on a daily basis, I go out and I catch fish in the morning for breakfast. And then I go up to you and I say, hey, it's morally good to do this, and look at me, I've done it. Would you then accuse me of virtue signaling?
I guess it depends on how excessive it is. I guess virtue signaling is essentially a form of bragging. Do you think
Bragging.
that people brag?
That's a different action.
I mean,
Man, if you were to
that's how I use the word. It's specifically
use
bragging
it in
about
different
how
ways.
moral one is. You can brag about how rich you are. You can also brag about how moral you are. And I think
All right,
when
so
you brag,
does this count as bragging then? Does my example count as bragging? Hey,
uh,
it's morally good to catch fish, and I've done it myself. You should do it too.
not necessarily. Do you think that bragging occurs? Do you think people brag?
Well, you would have to nail down the definition. Yeah, there's a simple. It's kind of like when I say that I don't contradict myself. It's kind of like that. Now, if I were to say it with a certain tone of voice, maybe then that would count as bragging to you. But that does not necessarily mean it's morally bad to brag, right?
I think by definition it is excessive. So
Wow. Okay, that's surprising. Um.
so bragging, excessively proud and boastful talk about one's achievements or possessions.
So you're gonna adopt that definition. That's what you're saying,
Do you
right? You're gonna
have
adopt that definition.
another definition?
You chose that definition of your own free will. All right.
I'll It's just an English dictionary definition. Here's
And you're
another one.
That's your definition. Which
Here's
one are you
another
going to choose?
one.
I only care about the one you're going to adopt.
Any dictionary definition: to praise or express pride in one's own possessions, qualities, or accomplishments, often to excess.
This is pointless. I know there are different. Those have different wordings. I need you to tell me which one you like.
I would say that it's excessive pride and boasting.
Okay, so can you prove that a person is boasting excessively? Is it possible to prove where that line is when saying something pridefully becomes boastful, or when it becomes excessive?
Yeah, do you?
I don't think I don't I don't think that there's a clear line there. I don't accuse people of bragging. I don't go around accusing people of bragging. Um, And so, and so, the example that I gave about getting up and fishing, to me, that's an example of someone holding a moral view, following through with a moral view, and encouraging others to adopt the same moral view and do the same action. That's what I call that. Okay. But once you call that bragging, there's a colloquial, there's a connotation, there's a negative connotation with the word brag.
Mm-hmm.
And so unless you, I, I wouldn't, I wouldn't use words like that. I try to be neutral in that sense. I try to speak more in a neutral sense, in order to not give the wrong impression. And so if you're going to accuse people of bragging, if I would want to know exactly where that line is.
So I think one way you could tell is kind of if everyone already agrees and you're just saying it even though everyone already knows what the right
Okay, so
answer
if the other
is.
person, okay, so if it's me and you on the island, and I fish and I say it's morally good, and you also fish in the mornings, and you also believe it's morally good, then it would be bragging for me to say, "Hey, it's morally good, and you should do it too." So because you
Well,
already do it,
if
right?
you win, I think you'd have to go a little farther if you were like, I caught 100 fish. I'm like, I get it. And you kept going on and on about how skillful you are at fishing. I think bragging can be a humorous thing. I think you can brag sarcastically, like, haha, I got more fish than you, and you have this rapport with your buddies, and maybe it's even a competition. And you have supposed bragging rights. That's fine. But I think that it can become mean spirited, it can become insidious.
Oh, oh boy. Um,
It can become destructive, it can become
hold
manipulative.
on, hold on, hold on. Your definition of bragging already included excessive. That's the problem that I'm having right now.
Yeah, I think humor often deals in excess, so that's fine.
No, you said so. In your view, it's not morally bad to brag. Is that? It's not
Not
necessarily more.
necessarily, but that's in a kind of a disingenuous way. You're not actually bragging, you're making fun of bragging if you're doing it sarcastically. But if you're serious about it, all you're doing is trying to impress someone.
How does this relate back to the example that I'm saying? Without having to catch 100 fish, would you call that bragging or not? Is that excessive or not?
The example you gave, I don't think it's excessive or
Okay.
bragging.
Okay. So then it wouldn't be virtue signaling, right?
Right.
All right.
But if you went around a gay wedding and were like, I support the
Let's
gays. I think
let's
I think gay
let's
marriage is so
let's stick
great,
to
you
the example I
guys.
gave. Let's stick to the example I already gave.
Well, I don't
But
think there's much moral content in fishing, so
but that's what's going to clear this stuff up. Okay. Um. Yeah. Because it's like I was saying, there's a tendency for people like you to come up with certain types of views that
what do you
inherently
mean?
rely that I haven't even finished my sentence, that inherently rely on a mass of people acting in a particular way. And like when I was talking about the example of having a victims having a tremendous amount of power, that's a type of view that certain types of people tend, you know, to have. And there's a problem. There's a consistent problem with those kinds of views that I see.
What do you mean people like me? Because you've said that a few times now.
People who say things, people who say the kinds of things that you said in your discussion with Smokey. That's what I mean.
Well, I'm not like Smokey at all, and he agreed with those things, and he said some of those. I wouldn't lump Smokey and me in the same category, politically or otherwise. We disagree on a lot of politics. We agree on a couple things.
I'm sure.
And we really disagree on morality, and we really disagree on religion.
Okay, so the things
we
that
really
I have
disagree on abortion.
The things that you've said, the things that you said in your discussion with Smokey, the people who agree with the things that you've said, that's all I meant when I say people like you. Okay, the kinds of people who say the things that you said in that discussion.
Okay.
All right.
I think that's a pretty diverse group of people, just for the record.
Yeah, sure, but you can't accuse me of what you thought you were trying to accuse me of. So,
what did you think I was trying to accuse you of? I just
lumping
wanted
you in with Smokey. I think that's what you claimed.
I just didn't know what you meant.
Right. Well, now it's clear.
Okay.
Yeah. So, some people join the mob of people standing up for victims, so the mob doesn't turn on them. Now, again, back to the example on the island. Okay. So I fish. I say to you, hey, it's good to fish. And then there's another person on the side. Now, the person on the side in this case would be the mob. All right. So, actually, this situation calls for a victim, right? So, I suppose, let me see. Victim, we need you to be some people. Join the mob of people standing up for victims, so the mob doesn't turn on them. I mean, this whole set of views just so ridiculous that.
What is ridiculous about that? That you're claiming that doesn't happen?
It's like you haven't even considered that maybe they actually hold the underlying moral view.
Of course some people do. That's why I said some people.
I would want you to go around actually asking people if they hold the underlying moral view. That's what I would want.
I have.
To do.
Some people do it because they actually believe in the mob. Some people just use the mob as cover so that the mob doesn't turn on them. And I've talked to people. I've talked to people on both sides of that. And I've been on both sides of that.
Oh my goodness.
So I know at least one person has done it, me.
There you go.
And I've talked to other people who've done it. And I've seen multiple testimonials of other people who've done it.
Who've claimed to do it.
Throughout history.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you see, I'm going to have a problem with...
So you don't believe them? You don't believe the personal experience and testimony of those people who are talking about their own motivations?
What I'm saying is that it's possible to scientifically prove that a person claimed to do something. And what you're doing is you seem to be sowing...
So you think I'm lying?
I haven't even... See, that's the thing, too. I don't believe it's possible to scientifically prove that a person is lying. All right? Because I think it involves mental intent, and I don't think such intent is provable unless it's spoken. So...
Unless the intent is not provable unless it's spoken. Okay, the intent has been spoken, so what now?
What do you mean?
I just told you what my intent was, and I've told you that other people have told me what their intent was, and I've told you that I've read people who've documented what their intent was. Okay,
then that's better. All right.
Yeah.
All right, so like I said, it is possible to prove that those people claimed those things. All right, and so um, it's like you're impugning the motives of people. It's like why bother imputing motives to people instead of like, are you prepared to go up and ask the people if they actually are um, virtue signaling or whatever? Because to me, it seems you have a tendency, like
Yeah,
you
but
just
people
accused
committing it wouldn't
corporation.
admit it.
See, that's perfect. That's a perfect conspiracy theory right there. You've you've now explained why there wouldn't be evidence
Why
to
would
support
someone why would someone admit that they're doing something bad?
that's kind of that's a
I think
conspiracy
it's
theory.
totally
You're
fair
getting
to
into conspiracy theory.
I think it's fair to pathologize, and it's not a conspiracy. It's just analyzing intent.
I think
That's not a conspiracy. Someone
I think
needs
you've literally created a conspiracy theory around
that.
people
That's not a
who
conspiracy. That's just someone being dishonest. That's a dishonesty theory. I am theorizing or hypothesizing about what their motives are, and I may or may not have evidence for it.
and you're explaining why you don't have evidence for it. You're explaining because they're
Sometimes we
going to
do.
be lying about the evidence. They're gonna
Sometimes
lie.
we do have evidence, though, and a lot of times we're speaking about people. We don't necessarily know which individuals they are, but we know this is a trend that happens with some people. I may not know which person is a particular psychopath, but I know psychopathy exists.
Um. So, like I was saying, I don't think. What about like? See, I don't want to go there.
Well, it's okay. I
So,
mean,
what about
we
like?
if you don't say something right, you can clarify or
I
double
mean, what
back or
I was gonna say that you seem like you could be doing one of the things that you claimed that you implied was a morally bad thing, um,
hmm
by using quote unquote fear of, you know, of these people who you think are lying, and you believe, you know, you're relying on this. When you see people standing up for victims, when you see a mob of people standing up for victims, you see that and you think to yourself, it seems to me that you think to yourself, oh, some of those people are actually just faking it. And there's no point in me going up and asking those people if they're faking it because they'll just lie.
I didn't
And
say there was
so,
no
oh,
point. I didn't say there was no point. I just said they might lie.
so then they're, okay, so
Of course,
then
there's a point.
you think that,
You should ask.
and
It's
then
on.
what would be the point in asking?
Why wouldn't you? You might not get an. You might get an
Because
answer
you
that you
already
didn't
claimed,
expect.
you already claimed that they would lie about it.
You
You
might
already
get an
claimed
answer that you wouldn't expect. Now, the answer they give in public and the answer they give in private might be different, and I've experienced that.
Uh, you got evidence of that?
Where they would say, I mean, I could publish private conversations, but I have that experience, and I have talked with people who say I wouldn't say this out loud, but this is what I really think.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Yeah, there's a lot of people who make such claims about having friends come to them about their true positions that they're not willing to say in public.
So you don't believe me?
I'm not going to bother uh,
Yeah.
claiming such a thing.
Okay. So
Uh,
you did accuse me of not caring, which is kind of one of those things you said no one should do.
you yourself said in number 6 or 7, I don't care what people feel.
Yeah, in the context of evaluating a truth statement. But you claimed that I don't care about uh, poor people.
About poor people. Didn't I accuse you of like contradicting yourself because you said that capitalism is the system that allows you to care for poor people or something? By definition, capitalism is the system you would use if you care about poor people.
Yeah, and that was in response to you saying that you used to think that I cared about people.
All right, so that was an offhanded comment.
Okay. Well, I
That
mean, we can
I
move
was
on
trying
from
to
that.
characterize. I was trying to characterize what you were describing yourself as in that conversation. You claimed that you were more. You used to be a more. I don't know how else to say it. Caring. I'm trying to. It's a. It's a summary, a paraphrasing of what you were getting at. That you used to be a more caring person, but then you stopped and started to only concern yourself with the truth.
I think that so there's two different ways you can use caring. Like I care about the truth, I care about people, I care about morality. Um but
Okay,
I
so then that's where the confusion was then.
yeah, I don't if someone's making a truth statement, I don't really care how they feel about it. I care whether it's true. It doesn't matter if it scares them or makes them uncomfortable. It's true regardless of that emotional state, or true or
But the,
false regardless of that emotional state.
but again,
The emotion doesn't affect the truth of the statement. So it's a waste of time
and
to talk about it.
the emotional the emotion can in fact, if a person says that they feel an emotion, they're not necessarily lying, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it's possible for
believe,
that statement to be true.
I generally will believe someone is feeling the emotion that they tell me they're feeling.
All right, so does this connect back with the mob of people? Um, what about the next point that some people are addicted to the thought process, the thought pattern? Some people are addicted to the thought pattern associated with standing up for victims.
Uh,
Why would you?
I think that I was just referring to the outrage thought pattern. And that can be caused by wanting to protect victims, being outraged. And it can cause people to seek victims when they aren't really there because they just want to be outraged at something.
Why even bother speculating on the mental states of people who may or may not exist? I mean, it's like you're you're too quick to think that people on the left or people who care about victims, you're too quick to think that they might be faking it. I think it's like you're so suspicious of people who care about victims that I think it leads you to not want to associate with the left when in fact, you know, associating with the left would make you more it would be better for society if you associated with the left, if everyone did.
I'm skeptical of pretty much every claim, but I'm not suspicious or skeptical of people just because they claim to be victims. I'm just saying we need to be aware that we could be taken advantage of if we're going to be swayed by emotional appeals.
Being swayed by emotional appeals. Okay, so again, um, like, let's bring it back to me. All right, I'm telling you that I'm on the left. I'm to the left of you on social issues and on
Mm-hmm.
fiscal issues. Would you like to accuse me of being swayed by people who are faking stuff?
I don't know. I don't know why you came to a certain thing, and I feel like it would probably be a waste of time because you would probably deny it and just go
So,
into
so, so
reasons
then
why.
this.
Like
All right.
I
So,
think I think that almost all theists are believe it because purely because of an emotional appeal, and for almost nothing else. All of their justifications are ad hoc or post hoc. They just believe it because they feel like it's true. But I'm never going to get anywhere with them by saying, "Oh, you just want it to be true," because usually I would have no way of proving that, and uh, and the actual reasons and justifications that they give are more interesting. And if they can be shown to be unreasonable, then they have nothing left to stand on. And if they still believe, then we can say, well, you have something else that isn't a reason that you're standing on. And those reasons that they give are the reasons that other people give to justify it. So if you can take those away and make those look unreasonable, then you can sway people away from having these unreasonable positions.
all right. So you've gone to the religious. You've used religion as the analogy. Uh,
Yeah, I think we can
I don't
mostly
think
agree
that's
on that.
necessarily going to be. I don't think that's going to be a useful analogy. But what I'd say is that since you've already conceded that such claims cannot be proven, and you've conceded that it would be a waste of time to even accuse people to their face of these things, why not also realize it's a waste of time to accuse people of those things behind their backs?
Well, I believe that it's true. So if I'm talking about it with someone and I'm saying, I think this is really what's motivating them, I might throw that out there. I'm not, I think it's true.
Okay, but as long as, okay, so if you were just throwing it out there as a theory for
Hmm.
people's motivations, that would be one thing. But from what I was gathering from what you were saying, it sounded like you held the actual position that those things are morally bad, and so I suppose that's the overall. That's that's an overall point to make, that like there's no point in implying that an unprovable action is morally bad and accusing some people elsewhere, accusing people behind their backs of performing these unprovable, morally bad actions. There's no point in doing that. Would you agree?
I think that there is a time and place for discussing possible motivations.
Okay.
Um,
Um, because can you see how when you're throwing out these theories about people's possible motivations and you're explaining why it is, that you have no evidence of those motivations, that can easily become conspiracy theories, right?
no, because I don't think it's conspiratorial. I think it's emergent. I think they group together not by conspiracy or design, but simply because they agree. And I think if you were to hypothesize something and then you implemented some kind of change based on that, and then you saw things were getting better, then that would be a good way to kind of confirm, okay, this is what's actually going on psychologically.
That would be a good way, huh? That's strange. I thought that that would be more in the realm of confirmation bias.
Well, if you saw that people were addicted to rage bait or something like that, I think
Well, that was your theory. If that was your theory,
yeah, I think that that's testable, and I think if you make some sort of change and people start getting less rageful and show less signs of addiction to rage, then I think that that theory would be somewhat confirmed. Or you could test it just based on basically what people click on. Can tell you what they're interested in. If they tend to click on rage more often, then it tells you what they're interested in. I don't really know how to go about changing that.
if something like that were testable, then that would be in the realm of stuff that would be scientifically provable.
There's social
Okay,
sciences.
and so then that would be different.
Psychological
different
sciences.
I thought we had already agreed that we were talking about how you're imputing motives to people instead of asking them what their motives are. Like, there's no point in. It's like you're poisoning the well of the left, and maybe the right as well. But
you're right
that's
that
the problem.
It can be a problem. Yeah, I think
the problem is
you have to be careful when doing that, because it could be a problem. You could get caught up in accusing someone of a motivation, and I think that is part of the problem, where people are saying, okay, so you're against Islam, well, you must hate Muslims. Well, that is a problem in false motivations. It's not an extraordinarily productive thing to do. I don't think it's wrong to speculate necessarily. You have to be careful.
Let me see. Antifa is like the brown shirts, the Nazi brown shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course, I disagree. Like, man.
So I think that there are parallels in that there are roving street thugs beating people for their political or perceived political opinions.
And then there are other people, right? There are other people who are part of Antifa who, what?
Generally, they're a revolutionary communist group. So I'm sure there were some. I'm sure there were anarchist communists, anarcho-communists generally. I'm sure there were some brown shirts that didn't go out and beat people. But most of Antifa is excusing and covering up for the violent actions of some of their members. They call it the diversity of tactics. Some people use violent tactics, some people don't. But if they're all going to stick together, then one bad apple ruins the batch.
Wow.
This is why, like, I call out my own team. I don't want to be associated.
Wait a minute. Go ahead.
I don't want people on my team to be acting out in violent ways. So I try to call that out. I try not to excuse them.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what you're describing is literally like part of the definition. Like when I was saying that when you say something is morally bad, you must not do it, and you must discourage other people from doing it. Right? That's just literally part and parcel of my whole system. What I expect of people who hold moral views. Okay, so in that sense, you're not saying anything surprising, but in the other sense, you say you're calling out. You call out your own team as if first of all, as if you think you're on a team, and even like you're saying that some action is morally bad, violence, right? You would say you're clearly implying that it's morally bad for a person to commit violence. I may have even had that written down here somewhere. And so what you're saying is that you would criticize people who commit violence, even if they're on quote unquote your team.
I think maybe
do you
even
think it's
especially.
Possible? Do you think it's possible for members of Antifa to do the same?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen much of that, if any.
Well, no, that's beside the point, isn't it? You wouldn't be in a position to see much of that.
Well, I talk to them a lot.
Oh my goodness. Really?
Yeah.
Again, you're basing your worldview, your view on Antifa. You're basing your view on Antifa on the particular conversations you've had with specific people, and then you're generalizing from those specific people to the whole movement. So I have a problem with that.
Well, like I said, I could be mistaken, but my impression is based on the hundreds of people I've talked to online and some of the people I know in reality, and the news stories I see, and the opinions of journalists about those news stories.
Speaking of which,
I don't see the left holding itself accountable, at least the far left. I'm starting to see more moderate leftists or liberals starting to hold the left accountable, and it's basically just now happening.
That's ridiculous.
That's what I see. I might be mistaken.
Okay.
That's why I have these conversations.
Okay, so when I asked you if it's possible for a peaceful member of Antifa to like do the same thing, by which I mean criticizing people for committing violence, you said, yeah, it's possible. But you haven't seen much of it, right?
I can't. I don't think I've seen any of it. Yeah.
Okay. And so
I've seen a lot of excusing of violence, though.
Do you even
To the point of being exclusive or near exclusive.
in your in what you've seen, in what you've seen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you wouldn't want to make sweeping generalizations about the whole movement, especially when you have people out there explicitly denying the types of accusations that you make. Antifa's like Nazi brown shirts. That sounds exactly like the kind of thing that tons of members. Never mind.
Well, I've talked about that accusation with actual members of Antifa. And
And they've agreed that they are like Nazi brown shirts.
of course they don't agree because they just say it's part of our name. We are anti-fascist. There's no way we could ever act like fascists. That's the typical response. And then I ask if they agree with.
So you admit they don't agree with you. You admit that they don't agree with your characterization of them.
Yeah, but then I ask them if they agree with the violence, and they agree with the violence. And then I say, okay, well, that's like the brown shirts. And I say, no, because our name says we're not.
So it's like the brown shirts, only in the sense that they're committing violence. That's really what you're getting at.
Political street violence.
Whoa. Wait a minute. Street violence. That's that's the term you're going with, huh? All right. So you're going to make a distinction between violence and street violence.
Yeah, because it's not as isolated as like an interpersonal like tussle between two people. It's not quite as coordinated as actual warfare. It's more of just groups of people using violence, usually literally in the streets during demonstrations or political gatherings.
All right, so you see a certain type of violence as morally bad, but then there are other types of violence that are not morally bad. Is that it?
Yeah, there's some violence which is justified.
All right, so when I asked you earlier, when I mentioned earlier that it seemed clear that you were implying that it's morally bad for a person to commit violence, you would actually disagree with that statement.
That it's morally that's morally good for someone to condemn violence.
No, you disagree with what I thought you were implying earlier. What I thought you were implying earlier is it's morally bad for a person to commit violence. But in fact, you disagree with that statement.
I think all violence is bad. I think all violence is evil, but there is some necessary evil. I don't think killing someone in self-defense is a good thing, but it's it's better than letting yourself get killed.
All right, so basically
it's justified. Justified doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It's just like it was a necessary thing to do.
All right, so to me, what it sounds like you said is there's this action that's morally bad, and it's sometimes doing that morally bad thing is better than not doing the morally bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I think
so
if the violence is consensual, like a boxing match, that's on a different context entirely, I think.
And that's fine. That's a different
Yeah.
It's a different subject. But when I speak about actions being morally bad, I've automatically, what that means is that if you believe that to be a bad action, you must not do it. And it's so if you really wanted there to be, you're allowed to add exceptions, you know. So you could say something like, um, it's morally bad for a person to commit violence unless it's in self-defense or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the way I would word your position is that, you know, you would have a string of exceptions. You would say, you know, yeah, you would have an exception for war, right?
Mm-hmm. I think aggressive violence is bad.
And street violence is bad. Okay, so
Yeah, I think
street violence is
that's.
bad, aggressive violence is bad, war not bad,
Well, if you're the aggressor of the
self-defense not
violence,
bad.
if you're the aggressor, that's bad. If you're the defender, that's technically, I would say, it's not good, but it's justified. Because it would be better if everyone got along. It would be better if you didn't have to hurt someone to resolve the conflict. But as far as violence goes, defensive violence is justified, whereas aggressive violence is not.
Um, Let me see. So for me, the way I see it, like the left is a it's a non-violent type of thing, you know? Like imagine a utopia, you know? Imagine like if everyone were nice to each other and everyone debated instead of
Mm-hmm.
uh, physically fighting each other. That would be a better society. That's the kind of society I would like to live in. And
Same.
those people, the kinds of people who would fill such a society, would basically be hippies. They're on the left. That's the whole movement is it's fundamentally peaceful, and violence is more a tactic of the right, which is why they own so many guns and such. And they tend to commit the most so-called, you know, the hate crimes, the so-called hate crimes. And so the very fact that a person, the people that you would call violent on the left, they're not as liberal as I would be, in, you know, in general. So the idea that like you're afraid of like the way in which the far left and the far right are similar is because they both use violence. That's inherently ridiculous to me because violence is of the right, and when you get a hippie and you try to get them to become violent, you're moving them more towards the right. Um, all right, so let's see.
I mean, I would agree that you're moving them more towards an authoritarian attitude or a like do as I say, might makes right kind of attitude.
Do as I say is literally objective morality.
Mm, not necessarily. I guess I would caveat that with do as I say or I'll beat you up kind of thing.
And where exactly is the government in that authoritarianism? You were saying earlier that authoritarianism is the use, it involves the use of government
Hmm.
to get your way or something.
Yeah, and the lines blur because, of course, a government doesn't actually exist. It is a real thing, but it's an idea in our minds. We It exists because we think it exists. It's
It's a moral,
people.
it's a,
The government exists where people believe it exists. So if a group of people form together and enforce their will, is that now a government? Is it a insurrectionist government within a government? Is it a rebel nation? At what point is a group of people a government? I think that's a fine. It's not a very fine line. It's a hazy line.
that seems like a strange type of argument to make. It's like, it's a strange thing to be bogged down in.
Well, I think it's a
The
legitimate
idea
question. At what point
Yeah, of course you do. Of
is a
course you could
group
say that.
people? Well, at what point is a group of people a government?
It's just, you know,
When they claim they're a
the
government?
typical,
When they act like a government?
the typical, you know, when you speak of the government, typically you're speaking of people in the, passing laws and such. Uh, there are the three branches of the U.S. government, and
But it's not an object. It's just a group of people behaving in a way that they're following certain rules or certain wills.
it's so strange that
Is a tribal chief a
the problem
government?
that I have, the problem that I have with what you're saying is that you started off defining authoritarianism in some way and being involved with the government. That's, I think, where you start. You were going. That's where I think you started going wrong. I mean, in this instance, I think you should just take that part back. You know.
But it also
Um,
has to do with what kind of government you support. So you might,
exactly.
yeah,
So then you should take out the part about the government and being involved in authoritarianism. Uh, that's irrelevant. Like, I don't even
sure.
know.
I mean, I'd
I
be
don't
willing
even
to
know
say
why
that.
people. It's like, maybe it's like totalitarianism that you guys are afraid of. I mean, you also use that word in this
Sure, yeah.
in this destruction in this discussion.
Hmm.
Um, would you say it's morally bad for a person to violate free speech, and by that is meant to beat up people for what they say?
Yeah.
Um, let me see. So, what about, let me see. It is possible for an Antifa member to be right about someone who is acting racist or doing something wrong.
Hmm.
Yeah. See, that's exactly the type of statement that sounds more nuanced than the one immediately preceding it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably said that to add some nuance. I don't think it's pretty hard to paint with broad brushes, because there is always the nuanced position, and you're always going to run into exceptions.
All right. And I think there's a certain pattern here where I tend to think that what you call exceptions are more common than you think they are. The kind of good people, like we've been speaking for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm I'm an upstanding person. I'm a I'm a pretty much law abiding citizen. Okay. Um, there should be nothing. I mean, there are some statements that you've made later on here I'm still going to have trouble with. But accepting those, like, there should be nothing that you should find scary about associating with people like me and just owning that you are more socially liberal, more socially liberal. You should be more socially liberal, and you should be willing to associate more with people on the far left like me, because all the scary stuff that you, the, the scary theories that you come up with about these hidden motives, I think you're way blowing that stuff out of proportion.
Well, I don't even think that the motives are that relevant. I think that the results are what's the bad thing. Um, and I don't think I am afraid to associate with the left. I think, or associate with you at least. I associate with all kinds of people,
I am typical.
and I try to associate myself
What
with the
about
left.
what
Like
about
I say that I do lean left. Who knows if
this?
that's accurate? That's my assessment.
Clearly not.
I consider
But
myself a liberal, mostly.
but you have a specific definition in mind when you say that. But
I'm
what I'm
concerned
talking
with
about, like,
liberty.
for example, Vosh. Okay,
Yeah,
you implied on Twitter that actually
can't
you hate
stand him.
Vosh.
Oh yeah, big time.
All right, but in fact, you. Or what about the Young Turks?
I used to be a big fan. I think they do sensationalized stories now, and I'm not a fan anymore. Everything's just sensationalism, and I think they cherry pick and exaggerate.
I suppose you would have to say that, but
I don't
consider the
have to.
possible.
I just saw that it
Well, it's
happens.
consistent with your centrism. It's
I have
consistent with your
I have no
your views.
reason to do that because I was a previous fan. It's not like I need to incorporate that into some worldview. I did like their content. I just am more skeptical of it now because I've seen how I've been duped by it before.
Okay, so so
Or and
because
I think
I
their
am
style
a
of
fan.
content has changed as well. I think they used to do better work.
It's strange. It's strange that you would think that, because like I I'm a current fan. I watch a lot of it, you know, uh, like on a daily basis, and um, I don't think I haven't noticed any big changes. Uh, and it seems like they are exactly the kind of person I am. And Vosh, he is on overall, he's like me. And if you're not finding me scary, then you shouldn't find them scary to associate with either. You should come back over to us.
Well, I'm not going to agree with socialism
Because you think it's inherently.
and racial politics. I don't think is healthy either.
You see that. Mm,
Vosh, particularly, I don't like his personality. I think he's just an arrogant prick. Uh,
whoa, no, there's no need for such language. Um,
that's my impression. That's why I don't like him. I'm just being honest.
what? Oh my goodness. Okay, so You thought I was accusing you?
Hmm?
I was saying that there's, you know, no need for such language. It sounded like you were, you know, name calling. And it's like there are people on the left, on the far left, who, I don't like I don't necessarily like their personalities so much, but they espouse the same positions pretty much overall
Mm-hmm.
that I would. And they are a lot like me. And if there's any sense in which you can see that I would not be such a bad person to associate with, then you should also think similarly of them. That's the argument I'm making to you.
Well, I might associate with their positions. Probably not all. I don't think there's anyone who I agree completely with.
That goes without saying.
That's a rare gem. Yeah.
Okay, but
for example, I really, really dislike Ben Shapiro. I hate his personality, and I really dislike a lot of his positions. But on the positions I do agree with him with, I just don't listen to Ben Shapiro because I don't like the way he talks. I don't like the way he carries himself. I don't like him. Same with Vosh. I agree with him on certain things, but I don't like the way that he defends them, and I don't like his personality. Now, I love hating Vosh. It's it's a love-hate relationship.
Sounds like emotions.
Yeah.
So why don't you just stick with the facts?
Yeah,
or
I
the
do.
truth? All right. So anyway,
There's certain styles, though, and I can
yeah.
enjoy and not enjoy the style.
All right. So when it comes to so far, we've been speaking a lot about social issues today in this conversation. We've been going through the way you tend to think about. Well, I suppose not. What you say about the left, the way in which you tend to associate negative actions with the left. And then when pressed, you also say those things about the right. So in our conversation up until now, if we just leave the socialism to the side for now,
Mm-hmm.
because I haven't made any arguments for you so far about that.
Yeah.
Could you see that it wouldn't be? Could you imagine that maybe I'm not such a bad person? My political views are not necessarily so scary. Would you concede that? Would you say something? Would you agree with that statement?
I
Based on what
suppose
we've
so.
said.
So I
And so,
think we agree on, social issues. I agree. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-gay marriage, pro-LGBT. I'm pro-unions. Most of the left-wing stuff I agree with, except I'm seeing this trend on the left of saying, okay, you need to be fired or you need to be canceled if you disagree with these positions.
That's objective morality.
No. I can disagree with you on what is a moral position and still let you have a job. And in fact, I think that you're actually radicalizing people toward the right and creating a separate society. If you keep banning people from society, you're just going to create a bunch of resentful people who the right will take in open arms, and you're going to radicalize people that way. So I think it's really dangerous to start putting censorship and authoritarianism into the left, because it defeats the whole point of the left, which I tend to agree more with. On the actual issues, it's just I don't like to enforce those opinions. You don't have to, like, okay, so one area I disagree with the left on is bake the cake. If the person doesn't want to bake you a cake, go to a different cake shop. That's my opinion. So I don't want to force people to do things that they don't want to do unless it's absolutely necessary. Like for self-defense. Is anyone's life in danger because a certain cake seller doesn't want to make a certain cake? No.
All right, so
is someone's life in danger because they think gay marriage is icky? No. They don't have to get gay married. But if they went and tried to stop someone else from getting gay married, that's where I would step in, and that's why I don't associate with the right. That's why I will never consider myself a conservative, and why I
hold on.
and why I don't like the right.
Hold on. Again, let me see. First of all, you're doing that thing again where you claimed that certain actions that the left takes will radicalize people to the right. That's the same kind of argument that okay, so for example, me and you on an island, right? I say it's morally bad for a person to misgender someone. Then you misgender me. Then I say, hey, you misgendered me. That's morally bad. I'm criticizing you for that. Would you then, in that situation, radicalize to the right?
If you were telling me that I deserve to be thrown to the piranhas if I keep doing it, and then there was someone who was like, we won't throw you to the piranhas, but they were like a militant group, then guess what? The only choice I have is, well, at least I tend to sympathize more with the militant group, because they are not threatening to throw me to the piranhas.
See, that's
so
ridiculous.
If someone is threatened to lose their job for expressing an opinion that is morally wrong, then that's kind of like, okay, well, you've given me no one else to associate with. So there's this idea, okay, so this X action is morally righteous, and we need to enforce it. I think that can go too far, and I think that there are different actions on the left that people can go too far in enforcing, and I think there are actions on the right that people can go too far in enforcing. And generally, I would agree that most of the prescribed actions on the left are better than on the right. Because the right prescribes things like gay marriage is bad, abortion is bad, and
all right.
and if they enforce that, that's going too far. By throwing people in jail. But if you enforce on the left, if you're gonna fire people or throw people in jail for having the wrong opinion, then that's going too far.
Okay, so I'm going to take issue with you changing my my hypothetical and making it ridiculous. That's one thing. And then you had a person on the side who's militant, and it's also so it's ridiculous also for you to say that because I'm criticizing you for doing a morally bad action, for an action that I think is morally bad, that you would then sympathize with the people who are militant, even though you earlier said that it's morally bad to commit street violence,
There,
and and let me see what else is there. Yeah, so it would be strange, like you said, I would be literally giving you no choice but to associate with strange people. It's such a strange thing to say. Like, there's a suppose. Okay, so in my view, if I think it's morally bad to misgender people, and then you misgender me, and I say, hey, you did something morally bad, I'm criticizing you for it. It sounds like you would say then, oh my God, I cannot believe you criticized me for that. I'm going to go off and associate with the other people who do that same action. Now, you claim that you have a line, like it wouldn't be enough for me to just criticize you for the action. I would have to go further
yeah.
and find other ways of discouraging you from doing that action. And I think that that's ridiculous because, like, even if we were to say, like, even if I said, you know, that action is morally bad, I'm criticizing you for that. And on top of that criticism, I'm going to find a way to discourage you from doing that again. Uh, for you to then see that criticism and then further discouragement of the action on top of it, for you to see that and say, oh my goodness, in reaction to you discouraging me from doing this action, I'm going to go and join and associate with the other people who also do that action, just because you've given me no choice or something. That's one of the types of problems that I have with people who say things like you say.
Well, yeah, it depends on the severity of the reaction. So, if I'm able to be employed and
You are really hung up on employment.
yeah, it's just an example.
It's almost as
If it's just if
a
I
deserted island. Let's keep it with the deserted. Can you come up with an example that would count on a deserted island? So, like, if we had, I don't know how we could have a jail with just two people on the island, but
if you prevent me from getting coconuts because I'm a dick to you. Does that make sense?
okay, first, and second, like,
It's
if
when it
you were to,
becomes a retaliatory cycle where if
I'm
I do
discouraging,
something that's so that angers you or has a or causes a reaction, and your
something
reaction
that I
is
think
so
is
severe that I then
do that thing
retaliate
anyway.
to you, then it's an ever escalating series.
No, no, that's not the situation I've set up. That's not the.
But that's what I'm talking
If
about.
you misgender, okay, but if you misgender me after I've said that it's morally bad to do that, and then I punish you, I criticize you, and then I punish you by not allowing you to have any more coconuts. If I say,
hmm
hey, this is your punishment,
Yeah, who are you to
then
punish
it
me?
would be, I'm Kris. My name is Kris. Okay.
Yeah, why do you get
And
to
so,
tell me
because I
what
have
I
free
can't
will,
harvest?
because I have free will, and because I believe in objective morality. Okay.
So you're allowed
So
to
if I
punish
then
me?
like I said, I have free will.
Is
You
that
don't.
justified though? I could just kill you and say,
Oh
"Well,
my
I have
goodness.
free will. How dare you try and stop me? I have free will."
What the heck? This is so strange. I
This
don't
is
see
the
why you
same
wouldn't be able to put
justification you
this.
give.
It's literally not.
I can justify anything by I have free will. Why wouldn't you why wouldn't you stop at criticism? Why would you need to punish me for
Because
it?
because in order to reduce the occurrence of the action, That's why you would discourage it by punishing, just like
Well, you could refuse to
parents do
associate
with
with
their
me.
children.
You could say, look, I'm not going to give you any more of my fish.
So I think
But-
we've hit.
But as soon
I
as
think
you
we've hit
start preventing me from doing my own thing, then I'm going to retaliate when you do that.
Wait, whoa! You're gonna retaliate? Good
Mhm.
lord! Now you're sounding violent. Now you're the one sounding violent. Or
Yeah,
militant.
because you started it. If you're going to prevent
What?
me, if
From
you're going,
getting coconuts.
you said you would punish
You're gonna
me for
turn to
being a dick.
violence.
So
You-
okay, so if you're going to prevent me from harvesting coconuts, how far are you going to go in preventing me from doing it? Are you going to physically stop me from climbing the tree and getting more coconuts? Then you've started the violence.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! I cannot believe you just called that violence. Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! That's a perfect place to stop with that quote.
Why is that?
Yeah, I better get going.
So if you,
It's based on what else you've said in this conversation. You have the script.
yeah, so that's not violence.
Predict.
So if you push me away from the tree, if you beat me down if I attempt to go up the tree, how is
That's
that not
the
violence?
hypothetical.
How would
All
you
I said
prevent me?
was,
How would you
I would
prevent me from
prevent
going
you.
up the tree? How would you prevent me?
It doesn't really matter as long as I say, "Hey, I'm preventing." I imagine defense. I don't know why you jump to
Okay,
violence.
so I
all
tear
of a
down the
sudden. You're
fence,
imagining.
or I go around the fence.
The whole point
What are you gonna do then?
is, I don't know. You're stretching the hypothetical beyond its usefulness. The whole point
No, I'm
I was
not.
trying to bring up is
How are you gonna
that I
punish me?
wanted
How are you gonna stop
hold on,
me?
let me speak. The whole point was I wanted a hypothetical that involves me criticizing morally bad actions, and punishing or discouraging that action further. That's all. That's all I wanted, because it seemed to me that you were saying that it's okay if you criticize someone for a morally bad action, but if you criticize them and punish them for it, then no, that goes so far. They may as well join the militant. You've left them no choice but to join the militant group.
It can
And I
go
just wanted
too
to show you
far.
how ridiculous. I just wanted to show you how ridiculous that is.
It's
on
not
its
ridiculous
face.
at all, and you haven't provided
But
many
but
answers.
You needed to
So-
change. You
so
needed to
cheating-
change the hypothetical. in
cheating
order to,
Cheating and lying on your spouse is morally reprehensible. Do we have laws that we can lock people up and punish them for cheating? No, that's between them.
Really? Because I thought it's literally something you can sue someone over.
For divorce.
Eventually. Huh?
For a divorce. But no, if I'm just dating someone and I cheat on them, no, I cannot sue them. No matter how reprehensible that is.
Whatever. All right. Let's leave it here. Okay.
Alrighty. Well, maybe we can
All
talk
right.
about the island example again, because I think that
Yeah, because
that
you
starts
were
a
trying to change.
that starts a war essentially.
There you go, implying violence. My
How are you
example
gonna?
didn't
How else are you
require
gonna stop me?
in the same way that punishments don't necessarily require violence. That's all I was getting at. You don't need to read into it any further. But the fact that you were trying to imply or try to find a way to call that violence, that's strange. You saying that I'm the one who started the violence. That's a really strange thing to say in light of what you said in the other conversation. All right.
All right, man. Well, maybe
All
we'll
right.
talk soon again.
So, yeah.
It was a good long
Interesting.
conversation. Covered a lot of
Unfortunate
topics.
that I didn't. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is send you the links that I had prepared. Let me think. I may as well. Yeah, I had a number of links here that I wanted to send to you to refute a lot of the points that you made in that discussion. I'll just send it over Twitter. All right.
Alrighty.
And I'll talk to you later.
All right, man.
All right. Bye.
Have a good one.